I never thought that the same hands that once held my face with love would someday shove me into the cold, damp garage like an old, broken appliance. I sat there on a cracked plastic chair, my fingers trembling as they clutched a box of old family photos. The air smelled of gasoline and dust. My son's voice cut through the walls like a blade, each word sharper than the last. "She refuses to live with a useless old woman," he screamed, his voice echoing off the kitchen tiles. "She says either you go or she goes, and I'm not losing my wife because of you." I shivered as I pressed a photo to my chest, a picture of us at his 5th birthday party. He was wearing a crooked paper crown, his eyes sparkling as he leaned into me for a hug. Back then, I thought that love would last forever. I set the photo on my lap and took a deep, steady breath. My chest felt hollow, but inside that emptiness, something fierce flickered. It wasn't the first time I had been pushed aside. When my husband died, my son promised to take care of me, insisted I move in so we could be a real family. I should have known that was just another scheme, a stepping stone to my house, my savings, my quiet little life. As the minutes crawled by, I could hear my daughter-in-law's sharp laughter echoing down the hallway. She had always looked at me as if I was something she needed to scrub off her shoe. Tonight, she finally got what she wanted. I glanced around the garage. My husband's old toolbox sat in the corner, covered in a thick layer of dust. Stacks of storage boxes loomed over me like silent judges. In that heavy quiet, my heart hardened. I wrapped my shawl tighter around my shoulders and looked back at the door. They wouldn't come check on me. They didn't even care if I froze out here. I had always been the quiet type, the kind to smooth things over, to swallow my pride for the sake of family peace. But tonight, I felt every ounce of that shame burning away. I stood up slowly, my knees creaking. I pressed my hand over the family photos one last time and felt the cold resolve seep into my bones. I realized in that moment that I wasn't the helpless old woman they thought they had banished. No, I was the rightful owner of this home, the keeper of my husband's legacy, and the one holding the true power in my trembling fingers. In the darkness of my own garage, I felt something shift inside me, a promise. I would not let them win. I woke up before the sun, the cold biting at my hands as I fumbled with the small kettle I had set up on an old camping stove. The garage smelled of oil and mildew, but in my mind, I was somewhere else. In my kitchen, the one with pale yellow curtains and the scent of roses drifting through the window. I used to stand there every morning, rolling dough for fresh bread. The smell would bring my grandchildren running down the hallway, their hair still messy from sleep, their laughter echoing like a blessing. Those mornings felt like a different lifetime now. Back then, I felt needed. My grandson would sit at the table, chattering about school, his little fingers tugging at my apron strings. Even my son used to smile more often, coming home from work and praising my cooking as if I were a queen. It all changed when his wife arrived. She came in with her expensive perfume and sharp tongue, slowly twisting my son away from me like a vine choking an old tree. She hated my roses, said they attracted bugs. She mocked my old recipes, called them peasant food when she thought I couldn't hear. She rearranged my kitchen, tossing out the old clay pots my husband loved, replacing them with shiny appliances she barely touched. Now, instead of warm voices and flour-dusted laughter, I only hear the clinking of wine glasses and low, conspiratorial whispers drifting through the walls. This morning, as I watched the first thin rays of light creep across the garage floor, I thought about my husband's voice, how he always called me his pillar. I could almost see him, sitting in the kitchen with his favorite mug, nodding at me as if to say, "Stay steady, my dear." I tried to hold on to that warmth, even as the cold crept deeper into my bones. I heard them laughing in the dining room again today. My grandson's voice rang out faintly, but it felt distant, as if he was already learning to forget me. I wanted to call out to him, to tell him how much I missed our early morning chats, but I swallowed that ache. Instead, I sipped my weak tea and traced the rim of the cup with my finger, replaying old recipes in my mind, the gentle sound of a knife against a cutting board, the rustle of rose petals. I had given them everything. My years, my love, my patience, all packaged in meals, roses, and gentle lullabies. And yet here I was, shut out like a stray dog. But deep inside, something else was brewing, stronger than resentment. A calm resolve. I would wait. I would watch. And when the time came, I would stand tall again in my own kitchen, breathing in the smell of roses, free from their scornful eyes. Today, I chose to remember who I was before they twisted my love into a leash. And in that garage, among dust and old memories, I vowed that my story would not end in the cold. The smell of sizzling meat drifted into the garage that Saturday afternoon, making my stomach twist. It wasn't hunger that gnawed at me. It was the ache of being forgotten in my own home. They were throwing a big family barbecue. I could hear the clinking of bottles, loud music, the shrieks of children running through the yard I once filled with roses. At first, I stayed in the garage, sipping weak tea and trying to block it out. But the noise only grew louder, as if each laugh and each cheer was another nail in the coffin they'd prepared for me. Eventually, I stepped out, not to join them. No. I stood near the garden hose, pretending to water the dry patch by the side of the garage. I needed air. I needed to see their faces. That's when I heard him. My son, standing near the grill with two of his friends. His voice was too loud, too eager to impress. "Yeah, she's still in the garage," he laughed, flipping a burger like a showman. "Dead weight, you know? She doesn't even do anything anymore. Just sits there like some stubborn relic." One of his friends chuckled, shaking his head. "Man, you're too soft. I would have kicked her out ages ago." Another raised his beer, chiming in. "Better hurry with those renovations before she croaks. You'll get a better price without an old woman hanging around." Their laughter exploded around me like fireworks on a silent night. I felt my face flush hot, my fingers trembling so hard I almost dropped the hose. But I forced my lips into a thin, polite smile. I turned, acting as if I hadn't heard a word, but inside, I felt something snap clean in half. I ducked back into the garage, my mind buzzing louder than the party music. I grabbed my old phone from the shelf, my fingers cold but steady. I pressed record, stepped back out, and walked close enough to catch the tail end of their conversation. My son was still going on, talking about how he planned to open up the kitchen and get rid of all her old junk. His friends cheered him on like he was some kind of hero. I kept my head down, pretending to adjust the hose, but I made sure every vile word slipped straight into that little microphone. When I had enough, I slipped back into the garage, sat on the dusty floor, and pressed stop. I held that phone to my chest for a moment, feeling my heartbeat thunder beneath my ribs. I wasn't the type to throw plates or shout curses. No, that wasn't my style. I believed in quiet storms, the kind that crept up so slowly no one saw them coming until the whole house was underwater. As the music pounded and my son's voice roared on, I felt an unexpected calm spread through me. I knew then that I had everything I needed, a record of his cruelty, a weapon made of his own words. I glanced at the toolbox in the corner, at the old roses withering outside, and I felt a slow, fierce smile creep across my face. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was the start of my quiet revenge. That night, after the barbecue ended and their laughter finally died down, I sat cross-legged on the cold garage floor, with my small lamp casting long shadows around me. I pulled out a battered journal from the bottom of an old sewing basket. Its pages were yellowed, corners curled from years of use. I hadn't written in it since my husband passed, but tonight felt different. Urgent. I started listing every item I still owned that mattered to me. My wedding ring, the old tea set from my mother, a few pieces of jewelry tucked away in a biscuit tin, the rose-patterned porcelain vase he bought me for our 20th anniversary. I wrote each entry carefully, pausing to breathe after each line, as if reciting a prayer to the woman I used to be. Then I turned to the last page and wrote in big, shaking letters, "I will not let him win." When I finished, I stood and dragged my late husband's toolbox closer. I hadn't opened it in years. afraid of the grief that always seemed to spill out whenever I even touched it. But tonight, I felt no fear, only clarity. I slowly went through each drawer, the smell of oil and old wood rising around me. Under a pile of rusted screwdrivers and spare nails, I found a thick manila envelope, edges brittle and stained. Inside were the original land deeds. My husband's handwritten letter sat on top, ink faded, but words still clear. This house is for you alone. Never let anyone take it from you. I held that letter so close to my chest, it felt like his arms were around me again. His voice echoed in my head, softer now but steady. Stay strong. My fingers trembled as I pressed my lips to the paper. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, but it wasn't from grief anymore. It was relief. I knew what I had to do. In the morning, I wrapped my jewelry, the tea set, and my mother's vase in old towels. I slipped out quietly before sunrise, careful not to wake them. At the pawn shop, the clerk barely looked me in the eye as he examined each piece. When he counted the cash into my palm, I felt an unexpected rush of power surge up my spine. I stepped outside with the money warm in my pocket, the morning sun just starting to break over the rooftops. I took one long breath, feeling the weight of all my losses shift and rearrange inside me. I didn't think about the fact that my wrists ached or that my knees were screaming in protest. I didn't think about my son's laughter echoing in my head. I thought only of my promise. I would buy everything back when this was over. And when I did, it would be on my own terms, not as their burden, not as their relic. I walked home slowly, each step deliberate, the cash pressing against my side like a secret heartbeat. Back in the garage, I tucked the envelope and journal carefully into a bag and sat down on my old chair, feeling strangely light. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own life. I felt like a woman reclaiming her war drum. That night, after I tucked away the cash and hid the deeds under an old pile of blankets, I sat in the corner of the garage, staring at a small, faded wedding photo. It had been hidden under my mattress for years, almost forgotten. In it, my husband stood beside me, eyes bright, hair slicked back the way he liked, one hand protectively at my waist. I still wore that same shawl sometimes on cold mornings, though it no longer smelled of roses and summer rain. I ran my finger across his face in the photo, feeling the tiny cracks along the print, and whispered to the darkness, I won't let them ruin what we built. I thought of all those evenings we spent together in the kitchen, him peeling apples while I kneaded dough, of the way he'd insist on brewing tea exactly at sunset, claiming it tasted sweeter then. It wasn't just a house. It was our life stitched into every nail, every rosebush, every squeaky cabinet door. And now, they treated it like an old coat they could toss aside and remake to their taste. I heard footsteps in the driveway. My old friend Alice appeared, carrying a paper bag of groceries. Her eyes widened when she saw me through the half-open garage door. Good Lord, you're living out here? She gasped, pushing inside before I could stop her. She looked around, her face twisting in shock at the thin blanket, the camping stove, the old boxes stacked like walls around me. Oh, honey, she said, voice shaking as she set down the bag. How did it come to this? I forced a smile, reaching out to touch her arm. It's only temporary, Alice. I'm fine. Her eyes filled with tears. Let me help you. We can go to my place, or I can talk to someone. I shook my head firmly. No. Thank you, but no. I saw how it hurt her, how badly she wanted to pull me out of that cold corner. But I couldn't let anyone interfere now. The more people knew, the higher the risk that my son would catch wind of what I was planning. Alice stood there for a long time, staring at me, her hands twisting the hem of her cardigan. Finally, she nodded, wiping her cheeks. You've always been stubborn, she said with a shaky laugh. I let out a small chuckle, feeling my own shoulders relax for a brief moment. And you've always been too soft-hearted. She left reluctantly, promising to call tomorrow. When the door creaked shut behind her, I felt the cold creep back in, but this time it didn't sink into my bones. I pulled the wedding photo closer, whispering to my husband's frozen smile, I'll protect it all for you, for us. I glanced over at the bag Alice left, pulled out an apple, and bit into it slowly. It tasted like memory, crisp and sweet. That night, as I lay down on the hard cot, the photo beside my pillow, I felt something sharp and bright flicker inside me. I was no longer just surviving. I was preparing. After Alice left, I stood in the garage for a long time, listening to the echo of her worried voice fading into the night. When the last echo finally died, I turned and began gathering everything I had kept hidden all these years. I pulled the land deeds from under the pile of blankets, my journal from the sewing basket, and the envelope of cash I'd brought home from the pawn shop. Each item felt like a piece of armor, a quiet declaration that I was not finished yet. I wrapped them carefully in an old towel, tucking them into my worn tote bag, and pressed it against my chest as if it were a newborn. I waited until my son and his wife left the house the next morning. I watched from the garage window as they drove away, probably to buy more things they couldn't afford, or to boast about their soon-to-be new house to some friend. When I was sure they were gone, I slipped out. The bus ride into town felt longer than usual. Each bump in the road rattled my nerves, but I kept one hand gripping the tote bag, breathing deeply to steady myself. The lawyer's office was on the far end of Main Street, a modest brick building with a small brass sign. I had passed it countless times, but never imagined I would have to step inside alone, clutching my life in my arms. The receptionist, a young woman with kind eyes, offered me a cautious smile and asked me to wait. I sat down, my bag on my lap, my fingers tracing the seams of the towel inside. When the lawyer finally called me in, I felt a strange, deep calm wash over me. His office smelled faintly of paper and old wood, and a tall window let in a quiet slice of morning sun. I set my bag on his desk and slowly unpacked each document, smoothing them out like a mother fixing her child's hair. He adjusted his glasses and began to read through the deeds carefully, his brow furrowing in concentration. Every so often he glanced up at me with an unreadable expression. When he finally looked up, he didn't speak right away. "You have a strong foundation here," he said slowly, tapping a finger against the papers. "It's clear the house was intended to stay in your hands. But there will be steps. Legal ones. We need to prepare thoroughly." I felt a sharp breath slip out of me, my hands going limp in my lap. "I'm ready," I said softly. He nodded, his voice turning firm but gentle. "I will begin the work immediately. You have every right to reclaim your control and secure your future. But it will take a little time. I'll call you when everything is in motion. You won't be alone in this." I swallowed hard, feeling a warmth pool quietly in my chest. I didn't leave the office with papers signed or keys in my pocket, but I left with something else, the promise that the tide had finally begun to turn. As I stepped out into the bright morning, I pulled my shawl tight around my shoulders and looked up at the sky. "It's time to take everything back," I whispered to myself. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The next day, I rose before dawn again. This time, I wasn't just preparing tea in the garage. I slipped into the main house quietly, moving like a ghost in my own halls. I found the flour and sugar right where I had always kept them before she took over the kitchen. My fingers moved from memory as I measured, whisked, and folded, the smell of butter slowly blooming through the cold air. By the time my son and his wife finally shuffled into the kitchen, still groggy from their late night, a tray of cookies sat on the counter, golden and warm. "Oh, you're baking?" my daughter-in-law asked, her voice thick with surprise and annoyance. She eyed me as if I'd trespassed on her private kingdom. I forced the sweetest smile onto my face. "Just thought the children might enjoy something fresh when they come by. It's been so long since they had Nana's cookies." Her lips twitched, the corners of her mouth straining to form some polite response. But she only sniffed and turned away, rummaging noisily in the fridge instead. My son hovered by the doorway, his eyes darting nervously between me and the tray. Maybe he was remembering the night before, the cold of the garage, the safe that wouldn't open. I watched the guilt flicker across his face, so quick he probably thought I hadn't seen it. But I did. I offered him a cookie, my hand as steady as a mountain. "Want one?" I asked lightly, as if nothing in the world had shifted. He hesitated for a moment, then took it. He didn't even thank me, just bit into it like a man chewing on paper. I turned to make tea, humming softly under my breath. I listened as they bickered behind me, about errands, about bills, about who would pick up the children. It was almost funny how small their world really was. All their plotting, their harsh words, their greedy dreams, so loud and heavy in their minds, and yet so delicate, ready to collapse at a single touch. When the grandchildren arrived later, they ran to me with bright, open faces. I knelt down, hugging them so tight I thought I might never let go. We sat on the floor with their warm cookies and milk, their laughter echoing off the kitchen walls like the sweetest music I had heard in years. For a moment, I allowed myself to forget, to simply breathe in that innocence and warmth. But even as I wiped crumbs from their cheeks and kissed their hair, I felt the papers in my bag waiting, whispering to me, "It's almost time." I poured tea for my daughter-in-law, sliding it across the table with the same gentle hands that once held her wedding veil steady. She muttered a cold, "Thanks," her eyes already on her phone. I sat across from her, sipping my own cup slowly, savoring the bitter warmth. I let them think I was still the relic they'd shoved aside. I let them think I had no moves left. Inside, though, I felt the quiet thrill of someone holding the final card. And soon, I would lay it on the table. A few mornings later, as I stood by my tiny garage window, folding a blanket, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, my fingers stiff from the cold. When I saw my lawyer name, Daniel, lit on the screen, my breath caught in my throat. I answered quickly, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Mrs. Lee," Daniel began, his voice low and careful, as though he already knew this would change everything. "I've finished reviewing the documents you left with me. I found something important." I sank onto the edge of my cot, my heart pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. "A few years ago," he continued, "you signed a transfer of ownership to your son. Normally, that would make him the legal owner." My stomach twisted. I could almost hear my son's voice that day, urging me to just make it official, promising he would protect me. I remembered my trembling hand guiding the pen across the paper, thinking I was keeping him safe, not giving everything away. "But," Daniel said, and I held my breath, "your husband's original deed and will include a restrictive clause. It states the house was to remain in your name for your lifetime, and that no transfer was to happen without proper legal review and contest." I gasped, my free hand flying to my chest. "You mean I can get it back?" I whispered. My voice sounded so small, like it belonged to someone else. Daniel paused, choosing his words carefully. "We have strong legal grounds to challenge the transfer. It won't be immediate. We'd have to file a petition with the court to revoke your son's ownership. It will involve legal proceedings, and he may try to contest it. But the clause in your husband's will is clear. It gives us a solid foundation." A sob broke out of me before I could stop it. Relief flooded through me, mixed with a rising wave of fear over the coming fight. Daniel waited, letting my emotions settle into the silence. "You were wise to keep all those old papers," he said gently. "Most people lose them, and then they lose their rights. You held on, and now you have a chance to reclaim your home." I pressed the phone to my forehead, tears soaking into my hairline. "Yes," I finally managed, my voice shaking but determined underneath. "Please, let's start right away." When I hung up, I sat in stunned silence, my tears dripping onto my lap. All those nights in the cold garage, all those mornings, I thought I was trapped forever. I had been holding the key all along. I looked around the cluttered space and felt a fierce warmth bloom in my chest. I hadn't just found a loophole, I had found a fighting chance to come home. And this time, no one would take it from me again. I barely slept that night, not from fear, but from a quiet, electric anticipation that moved through my bones like warm rain. Before dawn, I stepped into the garden one last time. The roses, though neglected, still stood there like patient sentinels, holding tight to what little life they had left. I bent down and touched the brittle petals. My husband's voice seemed to rise from the earth itself. "Don't let them decide who you are." I felt my lips curve into a gentle smile, tears welling but not falling. Not today. In that quiet blue hour, I stood up straight, pressed my palm to my chest, and whispered to the roses. And to him, "You'd be proud of me." I took my time, savoring each small ritual of the morning: boiling water, washing my face, smoothing the wrinkles out of my old skirt. Each act felt like a quiet victory song. Inside, I could hear the faint murmurs of my son and his wife arguing over trivial things: curtains, countertop finishes, imaginary budgets that didn't exist beyond their fantasies. I listened to them, feeling strangely serene. They would not get one more drop of my energy. They would not see me flinch or plead or break. I brewed a final pot of tea, savoring its bitterness as if it were fine wine. My fingers didn't tremble anymore. My heart no longer fluttered like a trapped bird. I set the cup down, glanced at the roses through the window, and felt a sharp, clean certainty cut through me. They would only learn the truth when it was too late. A week later, my phone rang again. I was in the garage, folding the last of my old linens, trying to keep my hands busy while my mind ran in endless circles. When I saw Daniel's name, my breath caught. I answered immediately, pressing the phone tight against my ear. "Mrs. Lee," he said, and this time I could hear relief in his voice, a quiet triumph carefully wrapped in professionalism. "I wanted to call you personally to tell you, it's done." I felt the world tilt slightly beneath me. "You mean," I stammered, my voice already trembling. "The reversal is officially recorded," he explained patiently. "Your husband's original restrictive clause held up exactly as we expected. Your son no longer has any legal claim to the house. You are once again the sole rightful owner on all records." I sank down onto my cot, my hands trembling so hard I nearly dropped the phone. Daniel paused for a moment before continuing, his voice softening. "And now, you can proceed however you like. If you wish to sell the house, you can do so immediately, without informing your son, without needing his consent, and without risk of interference." A sound rose up from my chest, something between a sob and a laugh. "Thank you," I whispered, pressing my palm to my forehead. "Thank you, truly." My knees buckled, and I grabbed the edge of the counter to steady myself. "Sell," I whispered, tasting the word again. It felt heavier now, like a sharp stone I had been hiding in my mouth. "Yes," he confirmed. "You can finalize the paperwork as soon as you're ready. We can handle everything discreetly." I looked around the garage, the chipped concrete floor, the pile of folded blankets, the old rose shears on the shelf. All these silent witnesses to my humiliation. The lawyer paused, then added, "If I may, I suggest not informing your son until after the sale is closed. It's safer, and legally, he has no grounds to contest it." I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling the steady thump of my heart. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "Yes, thank you. Let's do it." When I hung up, my hand shook so badly I had to set the phone down before I dropped it. I looked out the small window. In the backyard, my son and his wife were sitting under the pergola, flipping through a glossy renovation catalog. She was pointing at some marble countertop, her voice high and shrill, and he was nodding like a schoolboy desperate for approval. They really thought they were about to inherit their dream life. The remodeled kitchen, the expanded patio, the shining future built on my erasure. I picked up the deeds and tucked them carefully into my sewing bag along with the journal and the lawyer's notes. Each item felt like a weapon, sharp and heavy in my hands. Later that afternoon, I left for town. I kept my head low, wrapping a scarf tight around my hair so the neighbors wouldn't recognize me. Every step felt like a drumbeat. "You will not break me. You will not break me." At the lawyer's office, the papers lay in front of me. My hands didn't tremble this time. I signed each page with deliberate strokes, my name unfurling like a final act of defiance. When I finished, he slid a second set of documents toward me. "If you'd like to change your will as well." I didn't hesitate. I scratched out my son's name. In its place, I wrote the grandchildren's names and a local women's shelter. I set the pen down and looked up. The lawyer met my gaze, his eyes soft with something close to respect. "It's done," he said quietly. I sat there for a moment, my breath slowing, a heavy, bittersweet warmth settling in my chest. It was more than a house now. It was freedom. And I had just set myself free. They would only learn the truth when it was too late. I made a silent promise to myself as I finished that tea. I would not inform them until every paper was signed and the ink had dried. I would not give them a single chance to twist my intentions or poison my resolve. I thought of my grandchildren, their small hands, the way they lit up when I baked. I imagined them safe and loved, receiving the parts of this home and my heart that truly mattered. I thought of the women's shelter, the mothers who needed a chance to start again. My pain would become their freedom. My loss would become their lifeline. And I thought of the roses, my husband's quiet gift to me, the garden that had been my sanctuary. They would not be bulldozed for some sterile swimming pool or torn out for a patio. In my mind, they would keep blooming long after I was gone. As the sun rose fully, I stood up from the table, pressed my hand to the smooth, worn wood, and took one last deep breath. Today, the fight ended. I was no longer anyone's servant. I was no longer their dead weight. I was the final word. That night, I moved like a shadow. I waited until the house fell silent, until even the refrigerator hum felt louder than their shallow breathing from the bedroom. I pulled out my old suitcase, the one with worn leather corners and a missing wheel. It used to carry my husband's shirts on business trips, then my grandson's toys when we visited the park. Tonight, it would carry the last scraps of my old life. I folded my few clothes neatly, smoothing each piece with careful hands. I took the wedding photo and wrapped it in a scarf, tucking it into a side pocket like a heartbeat against my side. The envelope with the land deeds and sale documents went into my tote bag, pressed close to me as if it were an extra rib protecting my heart. Every so often, I paused to listen. Silence. Only the soft tick of the old wall clock and the distant sigh of wind against the garage door. I moved slowly, savoring every second. Not out of sadness, but out of deep respect for the life I had built here. The floorboards under my feet had heard my laughter and my sobs. The walls had absorbed the scent of 1,000 dinners, 1,000 quiet mornings. When I finally zipped up the suitcase, I felt no tremor in my fingers, no regret. I carried everything to the door and paused, looking back into the garage one last time. The small stove where I boiled my tea, the dusty shelf with old jars, the cot that had cradled me during these final, lonely months. I bowed my head for a moment, letting a soft breath escape my lips. A silent goodbye, not to the house, but to the woman who had once believed love alone would save her here. I set the keys on the table, not with trembling hands, but with a quiet finality that echoed louder than any slammed door ever could. Then, I pulled out a piece of paper and began to write. You always thought I was too weak to leave. You thought I would stay, no matter how cruel you became. But this house was never yours, and neither was I. By the time you read this, I will be long gone. Take care of each other. You will need it now more than ever. Goodbye. I folded the note carefully, setting it on top of the keys. I stood in the hallway for a moment, looking toward the living room, where my grandson used to sprawl on the rug with his toy cars, where my husband once nodded off during evening news. I pressed my hand to the wall, feeling all those echoes one last time. Then, I turned and walked out. At the next stop, I handed the keys to the new buyer's agent, a kind-faced woman with warm eyes who gripped my hands a little too tightly, sensing the weight of the moment. It's all yours now, I told her, my voice as clear as glass. She started to say something, maybe an apology, maybe a polite comfort, but I squeezed her hand gently and turned away. I stepped back into the taxi, my bag beside me, my shoulders loose and light. The driver pulled away from the curb slowly, as if sensing the reverence of my silent goodbye. With each mile, the air felt cleaner, the horizon wider. I watched the fields pass by outside the window and let the warmth spread through my chest. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't running from something, but toward something. Freedom. He strutted up the driveway that afternoon, with his wife at his side, still high on the glow of their weekend celebration trip. I imagine he was already picturing the bulldozers tearing into the rose garden, the open floor plan he bragged about to his friends, the brand new kitchen where he thought he'd play the benevolent host. But as soon as he stepped inside, he must have felt it. The air wasn't right. The silence was too deep, too thick. He called out once, probably expecting to hear my quiet shuffle from the garage, or maybe smell tea brewing, or hear me bustling with the grandchildren's snacks. Instead, there was nothing. I imagine he moved through each room, his voice rising with each step. Maybe he started throwing open doors, calling for me in that sharp, impatient tone he always used when he didn't get his way. Then he must have reached the kitchen, seen the keys on the table, seen my note. I wonder what his face looked like as he read it. That tight, pinched expression he used to wear when he realized he had lost a bet. Only this wasn't a bet. This was everything. I imagine him crumpling the paper, his hands shaking, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Maybe he turned to his wife then, expecting her to have a solution, a plan. But she was probably too busy screaming at him, accusing him of ruining everything, calling him a fool for not controlling the old woman better. Maybe he tried to call me, his voice hoarse with rage and panic. Maybe he dialed again and again, listening to the cold, final click of the blocked line. I imagine him storming into the garage, ripping open boxes, tossing old tools and blankets onto the floor, searching for deeds that no longer belonged to him, for evidence of the power he never truly had. Meanwhile, she would stand by the door, shrieking about the future he had promised her, the big renovation, the garden parties, the money. Instead, they found only silence and each other's failures. Outside, the roses would sway gently in the afternoon breeze, as if nothing had happened at all. I like to think they paused there, the two of them, surrounded by the ruins of their illusions. Maybe they finally saw just how empty their empire really was, without me to hold it together. I was gone, the house was sold, and the keys had changed hands. And all they had left was a hollow echo of their own greed. It didn't take long for the phone to start ringing. Unknown numbers. Even in my new, small apartment, with its thin walls and quiet hallways, I could feel the sharp vibration of his rage echoing across town. When I finally glanced at the screen, I saw his name flashing over and over, each call coming faster than the last. I let it ring. Once. Twice. Again. On the 7th call, I answered. I didn't say a word at first. I just let the silence stretch between us like a rope he could hang himself with. Finally, his voice broke through, raw and breathless. What did you do? Where are you? You can't just sell the house. It's mine. You can't do this to me. I closed my eyes and imagined him standing in the gutted kitchen, his face purple with fury, sweat on his brow. I didn't do anything to you, I said, my voice calm and low. I simply took back what was always mine. He sputtered, the words colliding with each other in his throat. You're insane. I'll sue you. I'll make sure you never see a cent. You hear me? You owe me. I almost laughed then, the sound bubbling up like a soft, unexpected stream. I don't owe you a thing, I interrupted, my voice as smooth as still water. And the house? It was never yours. It was never meant to be yours. There was a long pause, a quiet so thick I could almost hear the sound of him realizing the truth. Then the pleading began. Please, please, Mom, we can work something out. Think of the grandchildren, think of everything we planned. I didn't flinch. I did think of the grandchildren, I said. I thought of them when I made sure every dollar would go somewhere meaningful, somewhere they might one day find true kindness. not lessons in greed. His voice cracked, turning from rage to something smaller, more pitiful. "Please, don't do this to me." I looked around my new apartment. The simple tea kettle on the stove, the sun slipping across the plain white curtains. "I already have," I replied softly. Then, without another word, I pressed the button and ended the call. I watched the screen as his number popped up again, and again. And then finally, I blocked it. I set the phone down and poured myself a cup of tea. It was quiet in that little room, so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat slowing, finding its natural, gentle rhythm again. I sipped slowly, each swallow washing away years of silent humiliation. For the first time in decades, my tea tasted exactly the way I liked it, strong, warm, and free from anyone else's bitterness. News travels fast in a town like ours. Within a few days, word spread that the house had been sold without a trace of ceremony or permission. His friends, the same ones who used to laugh at his jokes about me, began to whisper behind his back. He tried to keep up appearances, inviting them over to his new rented apartment. But they weren't impressed by half-empty rooms and peeling paint. They didn't come to sip cheap wine on second-hand couches. The same people who once called him lucky now called him a fool, shaking their heads at the man who lost everything because he underestimated an old woman. Eventually, he started selling off pieces of his pride. The expensive car he used to flaunt, the designer watches he posted about online. Each item he sold was another quiet confession of defeat, another brick crumbling from the image he'd tried to build. Meanwhile, I settled into my new life. I bought a small wooden table for my tea, placed a single rose and a chipped vase at its center. I watched the sun climb across my little living room each morning, no longer interrupted by angry voices or sharp laughter. I sometimes pictured my son scrolling through his phone late at night, reading the gossipy comments about him. "Isn't that the guy who thought he inherited a mansion? Guess he wasn't as smart as he thought." I didn't hate him. Not anymore. Hatred is heavy, and I had carried enough of it to last 2 lifetimes. Instead, I felt something colder and cleaner: indifference. He would survive. He always found a way to blame someone else, to scrape together sympathy from those who didn't yet know him. But he would do it without my help, without my home, without my love propping up his fragile ego. I took another sip of tea and looked out at the small courtyard below my window, where a few wildflowers swayed in the breeze. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel responsible for saving anyone but myself. And that, I realized, was the greatest freedom of all.